Hi. This is the second one. And I'm still going to talk about the first four readings a little bit, but a little bit into the second four readings too. So, yeah, I'll start now. The first thing I wanted to say just about the Black Subjectivities reading that we did, just the idea of like a temporal distinction versus a a spatial distinction in terms of like what Jamaican Canadian means versus like Black Canadian, and that identity. What did I write down? I wrote something down. Identity is a root or origin rather than a complex temporal sign of change, which is the problem. Not like what this person's proposing is a good idea, just that what identity is a temporal distinction. You're not the same identity no matter where you are, no matter, you know what I mean? Like it's not a soul, right? It's an identity. So it changes depending on where you are. It changes as your body changes. It changes as your body interacts with different bodies. And I thought that was interesting, and that there was this sort of exoticizing of the Canadian underclass, as in like how Jamaican Canadians are sort of characterized as exotic, dangerous. They're often specifically called Jamaican Canadian, or like the Jamaicans in Canada are like the most violent. We deport them way more, and all this kind of stuff. Is what they said in the article. So that was interesting. This sort of bootstrap idea of how newcomers to this country are supposed to handle themselves and handle themselves in this new context is kind of shitty. How in video art, specifically, I think, a lot of times you have imagined identities and imagined futures, and that's what people do with that work. So when what's his name? I think it was Fung. I'm not sure though. Anyway, I'll look it up. Was talking about how he was he in Vancouver. It was this artist that was mentioned, and in Vancouver he had all these like Asian queers of all different kinds, and it was as though Vancouver was totally populated with Asian queers, which is of course not the case. But he was imagining a future. He wasn't excluding people. He was just hyper including himself, which is sort of an interesting idea. It's sort of like what it means to have an identity and try to impose that as like a norm on other people, and then the question of whether identity is private property or if it's public property, and then like at that point you have to control the discourse as well. I thought that was interesting too, from the art union reading, which is that the market is philosophically at odds with the values that should prevail in a nation's cultural life. It sort of presupposes that nations have a cultural life of the in and of themselves, and in some places I think that's true, or they foster it well enough that it becomes true. But I thought, like, what is that, and what is it for? Like, what is it for? I thought that was sort of, it's still an interesting proposal. Then we'll talk a little bit about the other readings, which was Marvin Carlson, Performance and Identity. Is like performance art stuff. I've read some of this stuff already because I took briefly I took a performance art class in Viz, and it seemed in terms of like doing performances as art versus theater, it's sort of this like liminal thing. You can mark it, like you can definitely mark it, but it's not obvious. I think it wasn't obvious to me anyway. Maybe I'm a simple town. And that women started really doing it. Interesting that Yoko Ono started doing it super early, compared to a lot of people, but because it's it seems to be most like powerful in terms of discourse and just personally speaking, when it's women, just because our bodies are so specifically viewed, where they're either covered or on display for specific reasons, and you sort of become like certain, like every part of a woman's body seems to have been fetishized and perfected in somebody's mind as objects of desire. Um, and I don't think that's as simple as objectifying women necessarily, but it's different. I think a woman's body is different in terms of doing performance in public or in private, I guess, than a man's body, which I guess is obvious, but it just seems to be more subversive to me. And I thought that whole thing was interesting. I like the idea of like the personas. That was interesting, although it could get played out. And of course, you don't want to take on a persona of, you don't want to minstrelize something like if yellow face or black face or something. I don't think those are arenas that white people can touch or should, frankly, most of the time. I haven't seen it. It didn't make me uncomfortable anyway. And then artist video collectives. I loved this reading just because if you've ever done any leftist work and you've been in meetings, like the article is like a meeting where it sets an agenda, but it's very conversational. And it was cool because it wasn't full of like jargon, so that was nice. But it's just like it said I guess it was full of jargon, but it was a very non-academic jargon, right? Like it was the jargon of leftist meetings and how you set an agenda and everyone's late and they're distracted, and then you call to question like your own values in the middle of the meeting, and so stuff gets dropped off and it's kind of chaos. And it was just really satisfying to read, just to know that it wasn't specific to the groups that I work in, that it is international at the very least. But just how they functioned, I thought was really cool, and how they talked about media and controlling the media and like representing themselves. And it was mostly around a group. What were they called? It was Divas, but the book on the Make Activist Video Collectives, Queer Looks, Perspectives on Lesbian and Gay Film and Video. They worked a lot with like ACT UP in New York, who did like crazy actions and really good work, and had to deal with cops a lot and stuff like that, because they did some really interesting stuff and were made fun of actually in the media and stuff. So just how they sort of reclaimed those spaces, I thought was really amazing, and used video as acts of protection against the police for like doing heinous shit to them. So I thought that was really good. And I think that sort of aesthetic, this sort of do-it-yourself aesthetic, where it doesn't have to be like a ING website, you know what I mean? And that it doesn't have less value because it wasn't as expensive, I think is an important point. They didn't let anything stop them. They didn't let the fact that maybe they didn't have the best equipment or the most highly ninja-trained videographers or whatever. They just made what needed to be made, and it was beautiful because of it, or important, or whatever art is supposed to be because of it. So I thought that was really cool. And then I'm going to do the last two later, because this is already at 8 minutes.